Greetings, my friends. Father Leo here. And today I've got a very interesting topic and a well-informed um, resource person. And the theme we're going to talk about is addictions, opiate, and other aspects of addiction. And my guest is Claire Keast. Now, Claire has had a personal experience, which she will tell us about. And she'll also tell us about the resources and supports that she has received since the incident in her family. So, Claire, welcome today to our little interview.
Thanks, Father Leo.
Now, maybe to start with the notion of addiction and your son, Kevin.
Well, Kevin passed away in 2016. He was married, had two little girls who were 2 and 5 at the time he died. He was working as a social worker at a hospital in Toronto, but Kevin had a drug addiction. And the drug addiction had started about 6 years before he died. Mm-hmm. So he struggled throughout that time. But in the end, he relapsed and died of a heroin overdose in August 2016.
Mm-hmm. So I get a sense then that you journeyed with him and the addiction for about 6 years.
Yes.
And now what was that like for you, knowing that he was into addiction, especially heroin, and the dangers of that drug? Like, what was it like for you as a parent?
Well, first of all, I was absolutely shocked when we found out that he had used heroin. He almost overdosed at his home, and his wife called 911, and he was given naloxone, and right from there called us and told us what had happened. Mm-hmm. So from then on, I was very, very worried, but I thought maybe it was a one-off thing.
Yeah.
But it continued for a little while. I can't even remember exactly how long, but to the point that his wife, Sarah, said, "I can't deal with this." Mm-hmm. So Kevin came home, and immediately I found out that he was still using the drug. Mm-hmm. So I confronted him and told him that he needed help, and he agreed. "Mom, I need help." So at that point, we looked into trying to find a place where he could go for rehab. And before you can go to rehab, you have to go to a detox center.
Oh, yes.
So we took him to Toronto to a detox center that was on Sherbourne Street, a fairly rough area in Toronto, and left him there, and I cried all the way home. And then when I got home, he called and he said, "I can't stay here, Mom, but I want to beat this. I'm going to find a place." So he ended up going to St. Joseph's Hospital and was in detox there. And from there, we found a rehabilitation house in Hamilton that you didn't have to pay a lot of money for. It was covered by OHIP, which is unusual.
Yes.
He had to go to a detox center in Hamilton first to have a Hamilton address. So he did that. He got into rehab, and he was there for 16 weeks. And at the end, he relapsed. But immediately called me in tears and said, "I'm going to get right back on the horse, Mom. I know I shouldn't do this." And so then he went to a place in Toronto, almost like a halfway house for people with addictions. And from then on, he went to Narcotics Anonymous regularly, and he was in a STEP program to learn the steps in a deeper way. And he did that, and ended up going back with his wife, and things went fairly well.
Mm-hmm.
And he ended up getting his 1-year medallion after
Mm-hmm.
a year, and then he slipped. And the same thing happened after 2 years, and he slipped.
Oh, yes.
And the third time was after a year, and 2 weeks later, he died.
Mm-hmm.
So that rehab was the first steps that we could take.
Mm-hmm.
So during that time, of course, all the family was affected,
Right.
and there was a lot of fear every time the phone rang, wondering if he was going to have relapsed,
Oh, yes.
worrying about his wife and his children. And when he'd call to say he relapsed, I felt a lot of anger.
Mm-hmm.
I'd get angry at him and say, why can't you look at pictures of your children and or something? And he said, Mom, you have no idea how relentless this is. He said, when you're craving, you don't have any thought of anything else until afterwards,
Yeah, right.
when you regret it.
There seems to be that tremendous craving, and the need to silence the craving almost overpowers them.
Yes. And I recently watched a show on The Passionate Eye. It was called Addiction, and it really talks about how those drugs, those opioids, change your brain.
Sure.
It affects the dopamine in your brain, and once you have those addictions, it's very hard to break them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to learn a lot about addiction.
Mm-hmm.
So my husband Joe and I went to Forecast, which is addiction service here in Peterborough, and we talked with them there to learn a little bit more about addiction. And
Right.
I learned that relapse was a very common part of addiction.
Of addiction, yeah.
And so after that, when Kevin did relapse, I wasn't so much angry. I mean, I was disappointed,
Mm-hmm.
but we did try to support him as much as we could, and so did his wife, and so did his siblings. And Kevin was a little bit different than some addicts, I guess, because you never knew he was addicted by looking at him, or when he passed away, most people didn't know that he even had an addiction.
An addiction, eh?
But the other part that during that time that bothered me was telling other people, because there's a real stigma
Stigma attached.
to it, to addiction, and I was worried about people judging him
Mm-hmm.
and judging me, judging us.
Yeah.
So all those feelings of fear and guilt and anger were all part of that journey before he died.
And it must have been a shock to you when you got word that he had actually died as a result of that.
Absolutely. And he was alone at the time,
Oh, yes.
which is something they say an addict should never do. But he was alone because he was ashamed.
Yeah.
And because he hadn't used the drug for a while, he probably took more than he should have, and he passed away.
So that was 6 years ago.
No, 3 years ago.
I'm sorry, 3 years ago.
So
Then it was
the addiction was about 6 years,
Yeah.
and then he's been gone for 3 years.
But as you said, it impacted the whole family. And I think of that as it's not just the person with the addiction, it's all the worries and the fears and angers and disappointments. So then, so you carried all that, and then he died. And what has helped you and helped Joe and the family, but particularly you, what has really helped you to move forward during those years?
Well, initially, certainly family and friends and my faith community, all of those people who were close to me and who knew Kevin and knew he was a good man, they all supported me. I didn't hear people judging him or even though people who wouldn't know him probably judged him, but they helped me a lot. And the other thing was for me to learn more about addiction, so that, because I thought, well, maybe there's something I can do to help other people who are dealing with this. I have been to a few of the town meetings that they've held here, talking about the opioid crisis, because it's overwhelming to know that almost 14,000 people have died in Canada since 2016, beginning of 2016, of opioid overdose.
Yeah.
And they said something like 17,000 have been treated in hospital who have not died. So I mean, it's amazing. And before Kevin was involved in drugs, I didn't know anything about addiction, or I didn't even think about it. I didn't think it would ever affect our family.
Right.
And I always thought of people with addiction like the people on the streets in East Vancouver.
Yeah.
But they're all people too. They're all suffering. Something has caused those people and Kevin to start using a drug, whether it's depression, anxiety, pain. All those things get someone started, and then once they're started, it's really hard to stop.
Well, it's hard to stop any kind of an addiction.
Yes.
And it creates that dependency and the craving. And I know people have told me, unless you've experienced a craving, you have no idea what it is. It's just so overpowering.
Yes.
Overwhelming. Yeah. So you had a sense that your community has been, and the big thing, no judgment, because, as you said, even Kevin felt ashamed when he would relapse. And like, what are your feelings today, 3 years later? Has anything changed
In terms of
for yourself?
for myself? Well, I mean, the sadness never goes away. There's a big hole.
Big hole there.
And Kevin was such a live wire and a risk taker, which, is part of maybe an addictive personality. One thing I've done through going to these meetings, I've met 3 other mothers who have all lost their sons. And we've started to get together a little bit, which is very helpful, because we can talk about everything without judgment. Because even though, like, I haven't had anybody I know judge Kevin, but some things online, name calling, like calling them junkies or druggies or meth heads, or those are all really derogatory
words. And stigmatizing people.
Yeah. And I've learned, I think, that addiction is a disease.
Yeah.
And some people don't agree with that. They say, well, these people had a choice when they first started. But we all make choices that we're sorry about in the end, So these 3 women, they've all, we've all laughed and talked together and cried together, and I think for all of us, the stigma is one of the hardest things to deal with.
Yeah. That somehow, you want me to say stigma in the sense that, do you blame yourself or hold yourself responsible, or feel guilty that somehow you should have done something different? What is it?
I don't really spend a lot of time on that, because I always felt that I supported Kevin. I always felt that he was always open with me.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a lot. The guilt I guess I felt was because he did say at one point that he had low self-esteem, and I couldn't figure that out because
Mm-hmm.
I never really knew that.
Never saw that, no.
No. So, and I mean, the anxiety and the depression came later on in life. It wasn't when he was in high school.
No.
So, I guess I really haven't felt a lot of guilt.
No. Well, you don't need to.
No, I really don't think I have to.
No.
And as my husband says, I like to think about how Kevin lived, not how he died.
Yeah. Well, as you said earlier, the fact that he was addicted to drug doesn't mean to say he wasn't a good person.
Right.
He's still a good person with this situation as his own being. And I think the reading I've done on it is there's really no foundational cause. It may be several different causes for different people, but it's not any one root cause which gets people into addiction.
No, even these other mothers, it's been different with all of them.
Yeah.
You know, and then two of them, the children both boys, have died from fentanyl or carfentanil, which are deadly and are rampant in Peterborough, apparently. So another thing I've done is there's an online group called Mums Stop the Harm,
Mm-hmm.
which started in Vancouver, and the women who run that have worked really hard to advocate to have some safe consumption sites, to change the stigma, different things like that. But they're also a support group, so anybody who has a child who is living with addiction, or anyone who's lost a child to addiction, can belong to this site. Sometimes I find it helpful, sometimes I find it hard because the stories are hard.
Yeah.
But it is a good resource.
Resource for you. Right?
And of course there's individual counseling. People can go to Forecast. They can go to, there's actually a rapid access addiction treatment office that you can go to in Peterborough that's right near the PARN office, the AIDS Resource Network. So you can go there, or you can get individual counseling, which I haven't done, but one of the other mothers has. I guess I'm not a group person, so I just haven't done that, but some of my children have gone for grief counseling.
Is that what it seems to be? I'm just wondering that for people who either go to a therapeutic group or individual therapy, like, what are they hoping that an end result of that would be? What would you want the end result to be?
Well, I think for some people it's accepting that perhaps you did everything you could, but we're powerless over someone. We can't control someone else's addiction.
No.
And a lot of people feel a lot of guilt, thinking they should have done something.
Yeah.
Especially if they had been estranged from their child for a while, or that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then just all the feelings of death that the grief, the anger, the sadness.
Mm-hmm.
In a group, talking about that can be very healing.
Yeah. So that'd be one of the resources that people can turn to, is to find a support group somewhere, or counseling in order to help to come to, like, what would you call it? Coming to terms, finding peace. Like, what would be the best words to describe what somebody would hope for?
I think finding peace is a really good description. And in Peterborough, people can go to a group like that at hospice or at bereaved families. But one of the things that I think of when I think of a group, if I was going to hospice and most of the people there had lost children to an accident or cancer, I would wonder what they're thinking if I say, well, my son died of a drug addiction.
Yeah.
But one of the mums that I know here does go to the hospice group, and she said actually a large number in the group are parents of people who have died of a drug addiction. So she doesn't feel judged.
Doesn't feel judged. Eh?
Yeah.
But I get a feeling, Claire, that that's one of the things that you feel most about, is that sense of being judged by either individuals or within a group. It's one of your kind of fears.
Yes. My daughter-in-law Sarah has done a lot of advocating in the Toronto area. It's been hard for me to have the details of Kevin's drug use out there.
Yeah.
But I also know that it's helping other people. But you know, when things are on social media, there are comments.
Yeah.
People, just last week, there was a comment saying, because Sarah, his wife, talked about how supportive a husband he was, what a good dad he was.
Yeah.
Because he was.
Sure.
And someone commented, well, that's a bunch of bull because he's just a junkie. Yeah. So those kind of things really hurt.
They must really hurt to
They really hurt.
have people lay that on somebody, and especially parents.
Who, like I said, I'm a mama bear when it comes to my children.
Yeah, well, I think it's great to be your mama bear, but I can understand how labeling, and especially addicts are not bad people. They've got an addiction. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't make them bad people. It means they're addicted.
Yeah. They've got a problem, a disease, and I think some people don't agree with the safe consumption sites, right, because they think it's enabling the person, but it's proven that they do save lives. And when somebody comes to that facility, then there should be supports there for them to get into counseling or start going to Narcotics Anonymous, all those things that might help them.
So they're not just handing out, not just giving the addict drugs. They're offered that services of counseling and therapy and stuff.
Because a lot of people, you can't just stop those addictions overnight.
No. Oh God, no.
And if someone can at least go someplace where they can have a drug safely.
Yes.
I mean, I don't wish anybody an addiction, and I don't wish anybody had to go to those places.
Right.
But I wish that Kevin had felt secure enough to go to his physician and say, I'm in the midst of a relapse. Can you help me? Mm-hmm. You know? And in Narcotics Anonymous, they have a sponsor. Unfortunately, at the end, Kevin didn't call his sponsor.
No.
So that made, his sponsor was angry at him too.
Yeah.
Like, you're angry at him for not reaching out, but it was his fear and his shame that prevented him from doing that.
Yeah. And I guess really what you're saying too, with your own feelings, that it's normal. Grieving brings out the anger and resentments and bargaining and if onlys. So I guess it's pretty much long to grieve an addiction as well as grieving the death of somebody. Well, it is.
It is.
In many instances, it is a death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. And, you know, we do things to memorialize Kevin because, as I said, it's left a big hole in our family.
Yeah.
So he was such a funny guy, and different things like Simpsons quotes or some of his expressions, his baseball hat.
Yeah.
We keep those things close.
Yes.
You know, because and my daughter and I both, whenever we see a cardinal or a butterfly, we think of Kevin.
Yeah.
So those help. Those kind of things help me.
Help. Yeah.
Because I still feel as though his spirit is around me.
Oh yeah. Do you find, Claire, that it's getting a little bit easier for you, or do you feel this is going to be a lifelong burden?
Well, I don't think you ever get over losing a child.
No, that's true.
But, I mean, I don't cry the way I did in the beginning. I don't think a day goes by that I don't think about him.
Right.
And something reminds me, but I'm able to cope with that. We have his children regularly, and it's wonderful to have them, even though I look at them sometimes and feel so sad because they don't have their dad.
Don't have their dad.
And Sarah doesn't have her husband, and my kids don't have their brother.
Right.
So, but it doesn't seem to overwhelm me. People say the grief comes in waves, and I think my waves are a lot smaller than they used to be.
Used to be, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a tough road you've had to walk. A tough road, and while Kevin was here, knowing he was in the addiction, I think that strikes me that when you're talking was the fact that you and he had open communication, and that's unusual for an addict to have that open communication with their parent. You know, generally they have to hide it.
And he did hide it in the beginning, but once he was on the road, even with he would call us. If he had a relapse, he would tell his wife, and then he would call us and tell us, and like I said, he'd say, "I'm getting right back on the horse." But unfortunately, when he died, like we had been together actually the day before, but there were other people there, so he didn't tell us, and he didn't tell Sarah, and went home because they were up at a cottage. He went home because he had to go to work, and overdosed.
Overdosed. Well, that's interesting because I think you said earlier on that it's being alone and doing drugs alone is much riskier than if there's somebody with you.
Absolutely, and now that the naloxone kits are available to anybody, if you have an addict in the family, it's good to have that kit around, you know. We didn't know about that kind of thing.
No.
It wasn't really available, and besides, he was alone, so it wouldn't have done any good anyway.
No. But nevertheless, it does have its waves and effect on the whole family, as well as any death would. And
Kevin always said he didn't want to die.
No.
Like he fought hard. He'd say, "Mom, why did I become addicted? Some of my friends used drugs and they didn't become addicted, but they didn't try maybe an opioid."
yeah,
And something about Kevin made him risk that when his friends didn't.
yeah,
And we'll never know exactly why. I try not to. I used to go over and over in my mind the steps he took in order to get the drug and how he
Yeah.
died. I used to do that, but it doesn't do me any good.
No.
So, like Joe says, it's better to think about how he lived than how he died.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
he was a good man.
A good man, and you certainly enjoyed him because he was a lot of zest for life,
Yes,
really.
yes. He was
But-
very kind,
You know?
and
And it's a great mystery of, you know, the why question, and so many, like a lot of why questions, we don't know the answer for them, you know, and it's dealing with the actions that happen, and I think that you have found a lot of resources to find strength and support, courage, and to strengthen you to continue on. Yeah,
and certainly my other children are such a support. My daughter is, I find, very wise, and when I feeling something like I was last week when I heard this comment,
yeah,
she was very wise in talking to me about, they didn't know Kevin. You don't pay any attention to that, and don't read those, Mom.
no,
Don't read those
no,
comments.
no, because they're toxic comments.
Yeah, they are.
And they won't do you any good.
No.
no,
No.
no, they won't. Well, I say, Claire, our time is up, and I want to thank you for coming in here today and sharing your story. I know it's a painful story. Some unanswered questions. But above all, the fact that you said the waves are a little smaller gives people hope that it will be for them as
Yes,
well.
yes.
And I think that's part of one of the things we hope is that we give people hope that connect to the resources. Because I think you found there's a lot of resources out there that were there for you and Joe and family.
Maybe not enough for the person with the addiction. I think
No.
there needs to be, we need more in Peterborough, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. Because I think the big thing is, what is it, I've often asked the question, Claire, what is it about Peterborough that makes it so vulnerable to addictions?
I'm not sure.
I don't know.
I wish
either.
I knew an answer to
Yeah.
that.
Because there must be something, because we have the alcohol addiction as well, and other addictions. So I don't know. Is it something about the culture of Peterborough, or is a great mystery? Anyway, I want to thank you for coming in and talking about this, because I know it must be very painful for you, and took a lot of courage to tell the story. And I hope that people who hear your story will, as I say, it'll kindle hope in them that there is help available for them. So
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You are glad to.